Our reading this morning is from Irene Glass and Reverend Dr. Rebecca Savage. It's entitled, Charge from the Earth. There is a song beneath the soil. 10 million voices raise their call in no human language. Life flows through the tangle of roots, mycelium, microbiota, and crawling, burrowing, tunneling life. The song flows upward through trunks and stems and blades of tender grasses and races out into the air. It is picked up and carried on no human tongues. It is in the footfall of paw and hoof. It hums in the buzz of wings and the fluttering of feathers. It shines on scales and fins and slithering skins. And if we are quiet and pay attention, sometimes we remember that we are part of this song as well, and we have notes to sing. The Anthropocene is an experiment. What happens when we humans forget that life around us is part of us? That these lives have no less inherent worth and dignity? How many more singers of the Earth Song will go silent forever? Today, we are charged to remember, to know that as we live together in community, we are also in community with the silently singing lives in the vast congregation of the earth as well. The interdependent web of existence is no allegory. It is as real as the heart that beats in your chest. It is as real as the heart that beats in my chest. We are charged to do what we can to help those who cannot advocate with human language, who cannot scream for help when they are suffering. We have a role to play in softening the blow of the age of humans. We have a voice that can help to shape the world to come. We are so charged in the name of the sacred song, the tapestry of life of which we are a part. Let us remember and then act.
Hello. I wanted to do this talk on the topic of nature and healing and how it relates to my life because, like most of you, I really love and value nature. And I recently retired after 40 years of working in the field of human service, and I plan to spend more time in nature, and I plan to give more to nature. So my two questions were, can nature save us, and can we save nature? But first, this homily comes with a caveat. I am not an expert on anything that I'm talking about. Nature, climate change, spirituality, there are biologists and transcendentalists and scholars who are much more knowledgeable about these things than I am. But I have intense interest, lots of questions, and there's no group I'd rather have this conversation with than all of you. So here I am. I grew up in the city and suburbs of Chicago. As a child, I was a depressed kid long before I knew what depression meant. Some of that was because of circumstances in my family, and some was existential depression that started in the 4th grade when my teacher showed our class a film that said all the elephants would be dead by the time I grew up. I was a serious kid, and to ward off my darker tendencies, I never slowed down. I never slowed down long enough to give my feelings any real traction. I was the kid who got up early before school to deliver newspapers, joined all the clubs, and enjoyed staying up late to do homework, and did extra. But I found great solace in being outdoors, even if it meant shoveling snow or picking up dog waste. It was easier to just be myself in the context of a big sky, trees, and weather. I read with great longing about children who grew up in the woods or with animals. Think My Friend Flicka or Gentle Ben. I wanted to be one of those kids. But I was in the city of Chicago. When I was 14, I got accepted to spend a summer with the Youth Conservation Corps. I went to live in the Shawnee National Forest to build trails and do erosion control. And for 6 weeks, I didn't go inside a building. It was the first time in my life I ever felt truly happy. In high school, I took all the biology and environmental ed courses I could, and I joined the school's large ski club. I felt that same happiness when I went skiing. The first time I went on the annual spring break trip, I was looking out the coach bus window in the Vail Valley, and I turned to the chaperone and said, "Can regular people live here, or is this just for tourists?" So you know what her answer was. So when I was 18, I moved to Boulder to attend college. Call it college or heaven, it felt the same to me. Ideally, I would have studied biology and became an environmental scientist. That was my dream. But in 1979, my high school counselor told my parents there were no jobs for women in that field. And they, my parents, in turn, told me that if they were paying for college, I had to study something more reasonable. I think Trump would call that a girl's job, something. But my disappointment regarding career goals was far outweighed by my delight in having Colorado as my playground. For the first time, I went horseback riding, I took rock climbing classes, and I went camping with friends. I was learning who I was, and I defined myself more and more as someone who needed the outdoors and animals in her life. Water. The summer after college, I had the good fortune to backpack through Switzerland with a Swiss friend. She took me to a little town called Sonnen and told me we were going to hear some guy talk. She told me his name, but it didn't mean anything to my 22-year-old self. Soon I was in a big tent listening, enraptured, to the Indian philosopher Jiddu Krishnamurti, considered by many to be one of the greatest minds of the 20th century. Despite my ignorance, I was transfixed by his message and by his very presence. You could literally feel peace radiating off him. I've never felt that before or since. Using countless stories and examples, he said, "Your minds are full of chatter. You fill your minds, you fill your bookshelves, you fill the places of entertainment, and in so doing, you leave no room for the sacred." He said that you have to seek out silence, for there, mystery can expand without time and space. His message was that one must watch and listen and go beyond words if one wants inner peace. Well, that resonated with me. I was learning that the outdoors was very good therapy, and when I returned to Colorado, I moved to Fort Collins because I always wanted to buy land and live in the country, and that came to be. Within 2 years, I'd met my husband, and we had bought a 35-acre farm, and for the next 20 years, it was there, with a herd of horses, a pack of dogs, and many other wonderful creatures, including children. I was able to easily find that connection that Krishnamurti said is beyond words. So when I pursued a master's degree in human development and family studies at Colorado State, I chose the spiritual value of wilderness as my topic. Human development is basically what it says. It's psychology that looks at healthy growth across the lifespan. One of the foremost stars in that field was Abraham Maslow. He was a psychologist that theorized that once we have our basic needs met for survival, safety, love, and belonging, then we could advance to fulfilling our higher needs of self-actualization. Since self-actualization is fulfillment of a higher self, I figured spirituality was definitely a part of that, but I had to convince them. Then I found a scientist at the local Forest Service research station who was studying that very thing and agreed to fund my research. I was spending my summers interning with an outward bound type organization in the Sangre de Cristos, and we used those participants to help fill our database, asking why people were seeking, or what people were seeking when they went into the wilderness. I'm kind of preaching to the choir. I always wanted to say that literally. And because most of you are nature lovers, so I'll quickly say that most people were seeking more than just fun. Over half of the participants, and we surveyed hundreds of people, cited spirituality as a major reason for seeking out nature. And they defined spirituality consistent with previous research as a relationship with a greater other, a feeling of unity with life, living according to a set of personal ethics, awareness that we're all connected, a personal growth experience. None of this was surprising, and it sounds very UU, doesn't it? I actually went on the Forest Service site just a few days ago, and they cite all these things now. They say, hey, come to the forest because of this. I think I was wanting validation for my own developing spirituality. I believed in God, but not the Catholic one I grew up with. And the more connected I felt to my farm, to animals, to the sunrise and sunsets, the more I believed in a greater life force. People have actually been talking about the psychological benefits of nature for decades. There was a field of psychology called deep ecology that started in the 1970s, and it built on the work of transcendentalists such as Emerson, Thoreau, and John Muir. Muir said, to go inside, you need to go outside. And we know that spirituality and nature has a timeless history, dating back centuries to when the concept of Mother Earth was revered by indigenous people. Carl Jung postulated that people's deep attachment to nature and sacred sites is the work of archetypes and our collective unconscious. He believed that wilderness is a metaphor for our innermost selves, the wilderness of within reflected and projected onto the wilderness without. In 1934, quite a while ago, he stated, as scientific understanding has grown, our world has become dehumanized. Man finds himself isolated in the cosmos because he is no longer in nature. Our contact with the river's spirit, the wisdom of animals, the voices that can speak to us through thunder and trees is no longer heard. And with that contact lost, we lose a profound emotional connection. It's 100 years later, and few would argue that our society is more disconnected from nature than ever. And most psychologists and philosophers, and maybe theologians too, would agree that nature is critical for both our psychological and spiritual well-being. So, is it wise then just to go skiing at Perg on a Sunday morning, or to eat more meals in your backyard? Well, sure you could, and you'd probably get some benefit, but Emerson and Krishnamurti and modern scholars like Arthur Brooks would also say there are huge benefits related to going into nature with greater intention, not as a consumer just seeking pleasurable experiences, but as someone who is putting real effort into changing oneself. Solitude plays a key role here. Being alone in nature is something that spiritual seekers have been doing as long as there have been monks in caves. Solitude in nature helps us to go to that beyond words place. Krishnamurti said that because nature is not put together by thought, like religion or a set of beliefs, it engages our senses and holds up a mirror of the infinite and finite, the temporal and the eternal. So the answer to the first question, can nature help heal us, is yes, certainly as individuals. It would help counter some of the mental illness problems that are developing, from chronic cell phone use, for example. Nature has nourished me or saved me at every dark or difficult point in my life. It has gotten me out of my feelings into present awareness. It has made me believe there is a God, some kind of energy field that we can all tap into. So I have this deep-seated hope that eventually, before it's too late, more individuals and communities, societies and countries will start to see that caring for nature is both self-care and self-preservation. In the meantime, the next question is, can we save nature? Like many of you, I worry about global warming. I like to think of myself as pretty responsible in regard to the environment, but in the back of my mind, I was always wondering, what is my carbon footprint? I can always do more, but am I at least doing my fair share? No. I went on the carbon climate app called Climate Hero, and I found no. The app actually called me a climate villain, about as destructive as one can be, and I was surprised. I thought I was doing well. I have solar panels on my modest home. I drive a Honda. I seldom eat beef. I recycle. I compost. But I still consume too much. I drive too much. And I definitely fly too much. Like many of you, I love to travel. Take a silent guess. What percentage of the world's 8 billion people do you think have ever been on an airplane? 20% have ever been on one, and 10% won't fly in any given year. And it gets worse. 1% of the population accounts for 50% of all aviation emissions, and many of us are in that 1%. I was having dinner this past week with 4 UUs, 2 I don't usually dine with. One of them said, "I am confident technology will save us. Just think of what we're learning about AI. It's amazing." And we talked about how fast we're moving away from fossil fuels, how we have the technology to convert salt water to fresh water, all the efforts being made right now to make us greener. But I can't even be a tiny bit optimistic. In the last 200 years, the level of carbon in our atmosphere has risen 40%. Our oceans are 30% more acidic than they were 200 years ago, and by the end of the century, they'll be 150% more acidic. In 25 years, 10% of all the plants and animals alive today will be extinct. We're including coral reefs, countless species of insects, polar bears. Yes, technology will help with some of those things, but I think that will mostly be about assuring people have fresh water, disaster relief, clean energy. Technology won't bring back the glaciers or the old-growth forests or complex ecosystems whose insects and amphibians have gone extinct. Even if we hit carbon neutral by 2030, which would mean every one of us would have to drastically change our lifestyles and then convince the rest of America to do the same, even if we miraculously did that, it would take thousands of years for the Earth to cool and return to pre-industrial temperatures. We are set in our course, and turning around is not an option. Let me throw some more facts at you. 83% of carbon emissions on Earth, 83% come from 4 countries, and there's 200 countries: China, US, India, and Russia. To create carbon neutrality, our target carbon budget per person in this world needs to be 2 tons per year or less. Only India is currently meeting the per-person budget. But who likes a budget? Nobody. The average American currently has a carbon footprint of, remember 2 is our goal, 14 to 15 tons per person. That's what mine was when I calculated it. That's why I'm a climate villain, not a climate consumer, a climate friend, definitely not a climate hero. That's 2 tons. So I'm not here to tell any of you what you should do. I'm a villain. I definitely don't have my own carbon footprint under control yet, but I'm working on it. And I'm working on something called a reverse bucket list, where I work on giving up my attachment to things that I want that involve carbon. One of my problems is I fly to California 3 times a year to visit family. That's 12 plane flights, because every time you leave Durango, it's 4 flights, right? 2 to get out of here and 2 to get back. Half of my carbon footprint is right there. But I can buy carbon offset credits that help with reforestation or reducing emissions from landfills or helping fund clean energy sources. I can become at least a climate friend. I think I'd have to bring it down to 8 or 9 tons to do that. Also, we must think bigger than the individual level of impact. This is really important. If you wanted to help fight crime in Durango, you wouldn't be content with saying, "Oh, I want to help crime, so I'm not going to commit any crimes myself." You would think about how can we improve safety in our community on a systems level. It's the same thing for global warming. If we want real change, we have to think about changing the systems we operate in. We have to think big, like how to get LPEA to move away from burning fossil fuels altogether, or putting solar panels on our church, or planting 30 trees in our neighborhood. These generous actions make a huge difference. We can also have our voice heard at an industry level. You can contact airlines and convince them to use more biofuel, or cruise ships to only go to places that have shore power connections, or our kids' schools to stop serving beef. This overconsumption of resources and our love of nature and social justice is a painful contradiction in our lives. We are taking part in cutting down the sacred grove, whether we want to admit it or not. Our egos and pleasure centers in the brain tell us that we want what we want when we want it. A more comfortable home, a nicer vehicle, that bucket list trip. But human nature is such that we not only don't want to delay our gratification, we get addicted to wanting more money, more stuff. We numb out with technology, with comfort food, even with work. We've created extraordinary things in this world with engineering, architecture, the arts and sciences, but human nature hasn't changed. We're ruled by our egos, and the overabundance of comforts and luxuries that we face here in America puts us in a chronic dopamine deficit state. So we start craving bigger trips and bigger experiences in order to get the same high we once got going for a walk on the river. It now needs to be a walk on the Nile River. So it takes a shift in how we think. It's not just how do I reduce my global carbon footprint, it's when is enough actually enough? Can I simplify and still be happy? How do I live in a society addicted to consumerism and live my life differently, beyond words? How can I say I believe in the UU principle of interconnectedness and justice, but not reduce my carbon footprint, when I know that my consumption hurts poverty-stricken people in other countries, and they don't have the money to buffer themselves from the effects of global warming like most of us do? So, can we save nature? I don't think so. But even though our big blue boat is sinking with an irreparable tear, I don't feel the depression or despair I felt when I was younger. The Buddhist concept of non-attachment has helped a lot in this regard. Everything is impermanent. Our relationships, our lives, and this planet. And elephants. But while I'm still here and the earth is still here, I want to be part of increasing her health span, keeping it all afloat a generation or two longer. And in doing so, we help reduce the suffering of others on the planet. Joanna Macy, a 95-year-old environmental activist, a Buddhist, and a retired professor, said, "Action on behalf of life transforms. Because the relationship between self and the world is reciprocal, as we work to heal the earth heals us." Thank you.